Maybe something that I do that's been successful is during the discovery process. So generally, if you're working in-house, you're collaborating with engineering, product, and you're the designer. But you're generally, at least at the early stages, more collaborating with the product managers. So they're either you're working on a problem together, or maybe they've created a document to they've identified an issue. Something that I do during my discovery work is creating like a design document. So almost like the design version of like a PRD or a product requirements document. And it's like the PM and designer, they're doing their discovery, understanding the problem space, and then you come back together with your own documents. And I find that you're aligned better if you have something to show.
Number one. We are kind of live now. This is what I always wanted to say. We are live.
And we're officially live.
We are officially live, exactly. I mean, this is just an experiment.
I'm Tyler.
And I'm Nick.
Welcome to the Design Table Podcast. Hey, Nick, how are we doing?
Oh, yeah, I'm doing well. Just back from vacation, so I'm fresh and ready to get back to work. How about you?
Yeah, same. We it seems that we've both took unknowing to each other the same week of vacation. So we're back. You kind of brought it up before this call. We're back in the trenches this week.
Yeah. It sounds bad, right? Back in the trenches, but it's meant in a good way. You know, I enjoyed the work. So yeah, lots of emails to go through, to be honest. But then it's back to the actual design work.
Exactly.
Yeah. Curious to hear what you have on your list this week. Like, what's your, like, is this a typical week, like a week after vacation, or is it different? Lots of catching up, something else perhaps?
It's a lot of catching. I did a lot of the catching up yesterday. So it's about like going through the 1,000 Slack messages that have been going back and forth, the emails, that the back and forth chains there, the comments back and forth, just to see what the state of everything is. And then today I'm officially getting my hands dirty again. I have all the context that I need. So this week I can push through, but it's kind of weird coming back from vacation because I didn't bring my laptop with me, so I had no typing experience whatsoever on vacation, which was refreshing actually.
Nice. Now maybe it's good to know for people listening that this is a Tuesday that we're recording. So you mentioned yesterday. So yesterday, Monday, you had the catching up day, and then on Tuesday it's back to work, like the actual work. Did you have anything work related on your phone? Or do you have like two phones, or how does that work on vacation?
No, I have something. So I put snooze on my Slack channel, on my work Slack. So I got no pop-ups whatsoever. The emails I just ignored. So if I saw it's because we use Outlook at work. So it's different from my day-to-day Gmail account that I generally use. So if I ever saw that Outlook blue pop up, I just ignored it, and it doesn't give me that little snippet of what's included in the email, which is always nice. So it's just like, all right, hit ignore, and I'll get back to it so I can properly enjoy the vacation, so I can actually enjoy it.
For me personally, I find it very challenging to resist, knowing that something's there. So if you have the blue Outlook blue coming up and you're swiping it to ignore, like I would later during the day, I would be like, like what's going on? Not out of stress, but more out of curiosity, And if it's on my phone, like you say, but it's snoozed, it's very challenging for me not to just take a quick peek every now and then. How's that for you?
I did cheat a bit. I did check just in case something, but I only opened the direct messages. And luckily I got one compliment and then one, by the way, we have we have this event coming up on Monday. We'll reach out to you, which was like perfect. And the rest of the group messages I ignored. Because there was other people involved, and then they can handle it up.
Yeah, maybe that's a nice rule, like compliments only on vacation. Like if they message you, it has to be a nice thing. Like, hey, well designed, man.
And if it trickles into the rest of the work week, do that as well.
Yeah.
I'll compliment.
That's true. That's true. So now you're back. You're all caught up. Today is a Tuesday. What's what's your day to day like? Because we see a lot of people on social media sharing work. It's mostly very visual. Hey, look at this design or a mock-up or a prototype. But there's more below the surface, of course. I'm curious what it is for you. Just being in house, being a designer, a remote designer. Like, what are the highlights, or perhaps the low lights as well?
I mean, contrary to what we see on like Twitter or if people use Dribble anymore, I'm not Twitter.
No.
I spend maybe 20 to 30% of my time actually doing the design work. Just because we have things like design systems and we have kind of those constraints in place. The majority of my time is spent on research, discovery, some meetings here and there, and just figuring out like problems. And then also a lot of sketching and wireframing, just kind of mapping out flows. And then talking to actual users, because that's where, at least for me, that's the important part of it is understanding their problems, not taking their solutions, mind you. And then I think it's our job to come up with a solution, because I don't know if we talked about this before, but users don't generally know what they want. It's our job to kind of translate their pain points or their needs into an actual solution.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I've seen a lot of junior designer do this, including myself, by the way. I'm not trying to preach from a high level to like, you should do this better, but I made this mistake myself. I was talking to users, showing them a prototype. And then I would ask them like, hey, but now it's a table. Would you prefer a list here? And then they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah, maybe. Then I'm like, oh, okay, now I figured out it needs to be a list. But that's not the type of question to ask. It's more like listening to their frustrations, letting them ramble on, and you taking notes, and then figuring out a solution like outside of the interview, right? I think that's what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I do something interesting for, at least if I'm trying to validate sketches. I split the interview in half, and I pre-base and let them know, okay, by the way, we're talking about this general topic, and we're going to build this new feature, and we just would love your input. And I just kind of get their background, get their input initially on the concept. Like, if you were to imagine what this feature would look like, or if you were to build something to fix your current problem, what would you imagine that look like? Just so I can get that raw kind of unbiased point of view. And then I'll show them, okay, here's what we're building. And then we get that kind of that two-way conversation going.
Right.
Which I think works great, because I'm building something, but I want to see if what you imagine matches. And then maybe I kind of pulled out some insights from that kind of first half of that conversation, which is, it's always quite nice.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I like the 50-50 approach. Not sure if I've ever done that, but I'm going to, for sure now. I'm going to test it out. But then just a minute ago, you mentioned like 20-30% is design work. And then later you mentioned, wireframing and sketching and figuring things out. Like, was that part of the 20 or 30%, or is that outside of what you would consider, the design work, 20-30%?
I think I consider it outside of it, because it's less like polished. It's more like napkin sketching. Like,
right. All right. Yeah.
I mean, I use FigJam just because that's part of our process at our company. Not a fan of FigJam, to be quite honest with you. I
feel a rant coming.
I'm slowly getting better at using FigJam and to create some wireframes. I'm not a fan, or maybe just biased because I prefer their tools. I use
like Miro or something.
I use Whimsical. It's equivalent.
Oh,
but,
okay.
The great thing about Whimsical is that it has like all the components, but in like sketch form. So it's almost similar to Azure or some of those kind of sketchy ones where you can kind of just pull in the components and quickly build something. versus FigJam, you have to kind of pull in like a community library or pull in some other things. I just want to get in and quickly sketch something up versus like struggling along, or maybe I'm just because I'm terrible at using FigJam. So maybe I'm just
No, I think I agree. I think I agree with you because FigJam, I use FigJam a lot, but it's mostly for like strategic sessions, and having customer journeys and user flows and like boxes with text in them and then arrows and sticky notes. I don't really use it for what you're describing, like really sketching out something. So, and just thinking about like, what would I do in FigJam if I would try and sketch out something like what you're just saying? I think just thinking about it right now, I would be as frustrated as you are. So I don't really think it's the tool for sketching. It's meant for, I think, more collaboration, like more like a massive digital whiteboard.
Yeah, we use it for that as well. I'm curious what you use for your kind of wireframing at all.
I mostly use pen and paper, really old school.
Fair enough.
If it's if it's for me, like if it's just me trying to get started, and we talked previously about the AI help in this phase, but I have I don't think it's on camera, but just to my left, I have a whiteboard on the wall. I have my notes here. If you freeze frame that moment, you can see my 2-year-old daughter took my pen and started scribbling in the book. So that's not me. Those weren't wireframes, not yet at least. And then from the sketches on paper, I usually go somewhat more high fidelity, higher than what I would call wireframes. In case I have a project where there's some sort of design system in place. One of the projects I'm thinking about right now is something I've been working for, since October last year, I think. So that's more or less, half a year, like 6 months. We started with a very small Figma file, but I was building more of a design system or a component library, as time went on. Let's work on this button. Okay, create component. Let's work on this list, create component. So the quote unquote wireframing stage at this point for the project is basically just, dragging a few components into an auto layout. So that's very quickly to something to do. So I don't really need a separate tool for it at this stage for this type of project, of course.
Yeah, I think the benefit of, why I use Whimsical or even using a pen and paper is just doing work outside of Figma, so you're not tempted to go hi-fi right away. So you're forced to kind of work through the problem, sketch some ideas, work on the edge cases, and then once you've kind of defined it, it's easy to kind of plug and play into, like, if you have access to your point, design system, it's quickly to kind of slap it together.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think maybe I was having too much of a tunnel vision on wireframes are there just to save time, because it's quicker to just draw a black outline rectangle instead of a hi-fi design card component. But now it's also about focusing on a problem rather than trying to make it too perfect. And in the beginning of this episode, I mentioned like I have trouble resisting the urge of just checking my messages anyway. So I'm probably someone that has trouble resisting the urge of making something pixel perfect right away too. So perhaps I should try out the Whimsical, is what you call it, right? Whimsical. Something I should try for my next wireframing projects. So I think it would be beneficial for me.
I think so. And hot tip, they have a ChatGPT integration where you're able to kind of type in a prompt. Let's say you want to kind of quickly map out a standard flow. You can kind of quickly prompt ChatGPT, and it'll create a whimsical board for you. So you don't have to start from scratch, and then you can map out your kind of flow or journey map if you like.
Nice. Nice. So that works like if you say like a standard flow, it's like, hey, I'm working on my onboarding flow or create account
Exactly.
or that kind of stuff. Okay, yeah, that's nice. And that's what something I'm noticing as well, like with wireframing and especially the way I'm currently doing it using components. You only need a handful of things to be able to create many different flows. Like mostly it's text fields and buttons and perhaps a card or a list. Like, and you can mix and match those together to create all kinds of different stages within an app. On a website, not so much because it's more visual, but within your average software as a service product, I think those were the 4 or 5 things you need to get about 70% of the things in the wireframe.
I'm curious, do you ever present wireframes to your clients or your collaborators?
Well, fairly high fidelity wireframes, I would say. The thing that's mostly missing would be color, not just to prevent the question of, hey, why is this thing green and why is that one purple? And secondly, there's not always real copy in the wireframe, because there's a lot of it has to be realistic. I think we had a talk about this in one of the previous episodes. I'm not sure, but sometimes, like, let's say you have a target audience of like medical specialists. Like, I'm not a medical specialist, so I'm not going to try and write like copy or generate copy that's part of the wireframe, because then my target audience, while reviewing or being presented to, they're like, this isn't realistic. This is not something that would happen in real life. And that's not the focus I want to have on my, not focus I want to have while working on the prototype together or on the wireframe. So I think then it's better to just leave it out entirely, have very clear placeholder text, just so that the discussion within the meeting doesn't go into that direction. So it's, just to summarize, it's basically high fidelity without color and without text.
I think additionally, if a hot tip is, don't use the word wireframes when you're presenting to clients.
Yeah.
For years I've been using it to kind of, hey, by the way, this is a wireframe. What a wireframe is, da 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 da. So to additional point, using dummy text or not using actual text, calling it maybe a sketch, so like people understand what a sketch is, so they know it's not finished, it's not polished. Just removing those barriers so that it's clear that this is like a conversation facilitator versus this is a high fidelity, this is what it's going to look like, this is the intermediate stage, this is where we're crafting the idea. And I love your input so we can actually create the real thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's true. It's one of the things I reply to on your LinkedIn daily posting journal, I think, because I remember this, seeing this somewhere last week. And I agree. Like, wireframes have a bad image. Like, oh, it's just lines on paper and nothing more. I've also seen a designer have, for every mock-up he made, there was this design by himself, like sticky note in the corner where it says something like draft or in progress or something similar, just to be like extremely obvious, like this is not the final thing, just to prevent like the annoying questions where you always had to answer like, I know, no, we'll get to it in the next stage, but this is just a mock-up / sketch / in progress thing. Was also a fun thing to see. Like, he had his own like sticky note in progress component just ready in the corner of every page.
Yeah, I think it's cute that everyone has their own little tips and tricks and nuances to their flows. I think that's his signature.
Yeah.
I think the theme of it is just like removing the barriers. Like, if you're having those conversations with your collaborators or your clients per se, just removing those kind of little sticking points that kind of add a bit of frictions. So not calling it sketches, making sure that it's clear that it's whatever a wireframe is. Additionally, what I do also is, like, I don't even present myself as a product designer, because I feel like not everyone knows what that is. So I just say I'm an extension of the customer success team. And it kind of, it goes over a bit better. So it's like just removing, like, there's no ego involved. I'm here to listen to you. And I think if you frame it as I'm from the customer success team, they kind of understand it a bit better.
Mm. Yeah, especially if they are the customer you're talking to, then they're like, oh yeah, you want me to have success. And they're
Exactly.
much more on board. Yeah. I think, product designer, by the way, as a little bit of a side note, is easier to explain than a UX designer. Then you first have to explain UX stands for, and what is a UX user experience anyway. But someone designing a product, the product you're showing your customer, that's a little bit easier, I would say, but perhaps not as easy as customer success.
Yeah, I think just like the simplest form, like everyone understands it. And generally they're speaking with customer support or customer success regularly anyway, since regarding the issue. So they don't have to learn an extra job title. It's just like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
just speaking to a normal.
Well, that's smart. Yeah. That's smart. Like that's clever strategic thinking you would expect from a designer. Just to know, like, hey, they already talked to X. Let's present myself as part of X. I think that's a smart one. But it also shows me you're working. I already know this, but you're working at quite a mid-size or mid-size plus company. Just by the fact that you have a customer success team. Like most of my clients don't have a team like that. They're not big enough yet.
On that point, I'm curious what your, like, circling back to like what our week looks like. What does your kind of typical week look like? Like, and how many, like, for example, how many clients are you working with on a daily or weekly basis? What does your mornings looks like? How does the rest of your day kind of fold out? I'm curious, like, from that freelance perspective, like, how do you move and shake?
What I'm thinking, maybe the most obvious difference, but please correct me if I'm wrong, is that I have a bit of bookkeeping to do and perhaps a bit more networking, I guess. Not sure how much networking you do, but when I have a feeling like, hey, this current project might come to an end, like I need to have some leads or some maybes in place like before that happens. So, for example, this week I'm talking to a handful of recruiters, another designer similar to us, just like a senior level designer, that kind of stuff. So, bookkeeping means invoices and taxes, that kind of stuff. Like over here in the Netherlands, you have to do taxes each quarter, and then once a year, like a big one. So that's probably a few hours per week, the networking and the bookkeeping together. Let's say between 2 and 4, depending on the week. And in terms of work, I try to keep meetings to a minimum, to be honest. Like it's not forbidden. You have, for example, the productized design service, like the one making it popular, like Design Joy and a few similar ones. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but last time I checked, they were like, hey, no meetings. And then that's a unique selling point for them. I'm more hybrid. Like I come from a corporate background where my the low point was, I think I had my 9 to 5, I had 11 meetings in one day. Like there's no joke, like 11 meetings. So I'm trying to keep it to a minimum now. So I have more time for, the other stuff like the quote unquote actual work. And actual work, I would say is similar to how you described it. Design work, sketching, discovery, user talk. One thing I don't think you mentioned, but I guess you actually do as well is collaborating with developers, like because I'm fairly close to the developers. I do a bit of coding as well, so that every design I make, if a customer wants to, I can deliver in code. Not in a working way, but more like the static pages. So imagine a mock-up, you press export in Figma, but then it's code. So there's some more collaboration required there, just to make sure, like, hey, what coding languages are we using? Like, where does it have to be pushed? Like, should it be in a GitHub repository, or should I just, hand it over in some different way? So that's something I think I should highlight as well. Like there's a bit of coding and developer collaboration going on in my week as well.
Okay, I'm curious on like how does that collaboration like how regularly are you speaking to the developers? Is it really just like handoff where you kind of collaborating at the beginning? How do those conversations come about?
Well, it started, just imagine this, like I'm a designer first. But at some point, I got all these questions like, oh, that's nice, but can you build it too? And then I said no, most cases. And then that would mean I would lose the lead. So I was like, hey, let's learn how to code. This was just before AI became a thing. So I think that's an advantage now because I have a good solid understanding and then put AI on top, which means I can learn new coding languages rather quickly. So what I'm doing now is, let's say I'm a designer at level 8, for example, and then a developer, I started level 0 and level 1, 2, 3. Like the initial levels, it started with me just having my own files in my local repository, and then I would just share it with a developer. And there was no gap. So there was a big gap. So I have to be specific. Like I didn't know what they were doing. At some point, I would just go to the product, reload, and then it would be there. And then they did all these things I didn't really see. But now that I'm leveling up a little bit more, like beyond the first 1, 2, or 3 levels, I'm now for the first time part of like the main GitHub repository. Like I have the local version of the application. Well, I have a local version of the application on my computer, and I can literally break anything here, at home. Like any of the, it wouldn't make it to production, of course, but that's the level I'm in currently. It happened, this week. So now my collaboration with developers, this is a very long build up to your answer. I apologize for that, but it's also me learning by asking like, hey, everything I did here is hard coded, but I see we use variables over here as well. I think we can be, I can be smarter here. Like what would you do if I wanted to make this, A look more like B? Because I think that's more, future proof. And then they explain it to me, that kind of collaboration. So this is an example of me learning, but it's also just me understanding, the code base better because they've been working on it for years. And this is my first, I've been with this client for months, but it's my first week in the actual code base. So I have a lot of catching up to do. And that's the main goal, me catching up. And probably a bit of code review as well.
Okay, so it sounds like you're on the path to becoming the highly touted design engineer.
Yeah,
you're going to be
I think so.
A hybrid.
I think so. The fun thing is that like really like late 90s when I was like 6 or 7, like my father gave me like one of his old computers. We still had like a Macromedia and Adobe in early days. So I started with animation in Flash, and that required a little bit of light coding and with frameworks with
Script 3.
Action scripts. Yeah, that's one. And then I went to my like university education. They had communication, art, design, and development all in the first year, and then you pick one of those 4, and specialize in that one. And for me, it was really a 50-50 debate. Like, should I do design or development? Because both of them I had okay grades in and enjoyed quite a bit. And I went into the design direction in the end. But from school, I had a bit of foundation in code as well. And I think I have the right mind for it. Like I'm quite good with numbers. Becoming a design engineer, perhaps. I think the foundation is there already from really early 90s, like late 90s, like really early days, and then a bit from school as well. And I enjoy doing it as well. So I think that's the most important thing. I enjoy that kind of work. So I'm going really broad now in terms of design, plus development and a bit of strategy?
Yeah, I think we're similar in that I started hybrid as well, like coding as well. But as the industry changed, more specifically, I think you have more flexibility if you're freelancing and you can get a bit more ownership. But UX or like the web designer title kind of transitions from like web designer to UI or UX, and now it's product designer. So we don't do any coding at all. So that's something I miss as well. It just
Yeah.
gets you. I can still do a bit of HTML and CSS. But yeah, I'm kind of losing it day by day as a more automation tool comes in place. I'm a bit jealous.
Do you have any plans or desire perhaps to bring parts of it back, maybe on top or next to your current work?
I think I'm doing side projects kind of fills that need. So like I have like my day job and that kind of which is really fun and great. But then there's some muscles I want to kind of flex that are kind of outside.
Right.
So like working on side projects, I think beneficial for me is number one, I get full ownership of whatever that side project is. That means I can say I'm the one who says yes all the time. That sounds either dangerous or not dangerous. Um, but I get to work and do have full ownership and have full creative control, which is great. So I get to kind of um, get that off my shoulders.
Yeah.
So it's great to kind of have a bit of both.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's how it started for me as well, by the way. I started my, from full-time employment, I started writing, about design and about my experience as a designer, and that went into mentorship and coaching and community and writing even more and being more of a design content creator first before I figure out like, hey, wait a minute, I can do my day job, but then in the evenings and in the weekend as well, because that's probably going to be a quicker turnover in terms of a bit of revenue rather than trying to build some sort of content website. So the first thing I really did, like on Fridays and evenings, I had a bit of time left over, like for a local development agency, like only 4 or 5 people just in the same town as where I lived. They needed a bit of design help because their designer quit and they were looking for a new one. But to bridge the time in between, like they could ask me, a few questions every now and then. So that's how it started for me, like day job, 4 or 5 days a week, and then 2 or 4 hours a week on top of it, freelancing. And that's been growing slowly to become more. So maybe it's a bit of a warning for you as well. Like once you go onto the side hustle route, be careful for it not to, or you can expect for it to be so much fun that it will become very big. And then you will have like, okay, what direction should I go into? Should it be in-house? Should it be freelance? Balancing both, I think is very challenging.
Yeah, I had some experience. This is when I was in my 20s and I first started, like I did my 9 to 5 and I had like my side stuff, but I don't know if you're the same way, but I have like peak hours at night where I'm totally focused and I'm very efficient. But unfortunately, so I had my 9 to 5 but I was only efficient between 10 and 3 a.m., which was, which I tried to start something at maybe like 8 or 9, and just nothing was clicking. And then as soon as it hit 10 or 11, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Ended up eating into my, talk about work-life balance. It started eating into my sleeping time. So I started sleeping 2 to 3 hours per day, which wasn't sustainable. So,
No.
maybe I'll take tips from you if I ever want to balance it well.
Yeah. For me, it's to get the. I'm the same way, by the way. But then it's more for me early mornings rather than late nights. Like my natural sleeping time is like 10:30, but then I wake up at 6, like by myself without any alarms. Anything different than those hours, and I'm very grumpy and prone to getting a cold and that kind of old man stuff, even though I'm in my early 30s. But anyway, so then I went from full-time to part-time at my day job just to bring back a little bit of the balance. That's what I did at some point.
That's a good mix, I think. I like if you're doing half and half versus doing 100% plus another
Yeah.
50%.
Yes. Yeah. So I would have, your typical day job over here is like 40 hours a week. Then it's okay for me to do like 3 months of like 4 hours on top, like 44 hours. But then after 3 months, I was like, oh, this has been going on for a while. It's quite stable. These 4 hours. Let's turn the 40-hour day job into 36 hours. And then your 36 plus 4 side hustling is, still a full-time week on 40. I'm not one to take risks. It sounds perhaps a bit silly for someone, doing a lot of freelancing and side hustling and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it has to be like baby steps. I need to see first for a long while, like, okay, this is sustainable. This is going to work. Okay, let's take away 4 hours now. That's I'm not one to make the big leap and just say bye day job.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
Yeah, especially with the family to take care of. I'm a parent now. I have responsibilities. So sometimes I look back at my early 20s and I'm like, while living at home, perhaps that should have been the moment to take the leap because you have no one to take care of. But then now I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm in the end I'm glad I didn't, because I learned so much on the day job. Because when you're freelancing, people expect you to be there from day one. There's no real training period. But when you go to a new job in-house, it's very, I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's more of a startup period for you. They expect you to, take a few weeks or perhaps a month or two just to get used to the environment and the people and the way of working.
Exactly. Yeah,
I feel that's less the case. Yes, less the case. So with freelancing, and they're just like, well, I'm paying you by the hour. I want to see improvements and return on results right now. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit more grace when you're starting at a company. Since I just went through it recently, so it's like you have some training, learning about the culture, going through the documentation. I'm a bit itchy when it comes to that, so I wanted to dive in as quickly as possible because that's just how I learn. So I learn by just doing rather than watching other people do their thing. So I'd rather get in, make my mistakes, ask a lot of questions, and then I'll figure it out there versus just sitting twiddling my thumbs reading documentation all day.
Well, I fully agree. I think the more mistakes you make, the better. Of course, within reasonable amounts. But mistakes are the moments you learn the most. I'd rather have a designer on my team be a bit too forward, fall on their face, learn and become better, rather than playing the whole game with like the training wheels on. So let's make mistakes.
Yeah, I'm with you there because there's more. You're letting their creativity fly because if you're constraining them and not letting them make mistakes, they can't. There's potential there, I think, and kind of that's how we learn. That's how we learned how to walk, right? We fell a couple times. We figured out how to wobble our way to our feet.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Now we're really talking like design managers or design leads with a team. Like, do you have any like? You're part of a team, but do you have a design team or any like junior people or interns part of your team where you have like more of a coaching role on the job? Or
one part of a team, I think we're like 6 in total. I think we're going to grow to like 8 or so, with varying levels. So I'm a big fan of coaching and mentoring, but I think it can work both ways. So I can learn from a junior as well. There's someone on our team who's like a wizard at Figma, who's like so much better than I am. So there's tons to learn both ways. And like everyone on my team is amazing. So there's mentorship opportunities everywhere, regardless of their level.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear. I think that is maybe a question first. Like, is there any official guidance in terms of being allowed to spend X amount of time on coaching and learning, or is that just something that just happens naturally where you're like, hey, you did this thing here, how about next time this and this because of these reasons.
We're talking about kind of just like one-on-one with your teammates.
Yeah. Let's say
Yeah.
you mentioned like the Figma wizard, like the junior designer who's better at Figma than you, and you want to learn something. Like, is that something that happened naturally? Because I've also seen companies where they're like, well, you're allowed to spend 10% of your time each week on, self-improvement and learning and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a mix of both. Generally what I've seen. So I think like reaching out and asking for a mentorship, which happened, that happens naturally. And there's generally like a yearly budget on like education. That is an allowance. You can kind of either purchase a course, or if you want to join a boot camp, they allow that, because I mean, if you're investing in your employees to get better, the ROI there is super clear. So I think a mixed bag of both is what I've seen. At most companies, there's usually an allowance for education. I think mentorship, depending on the structure, it happens organically.
Well, I think my best thing to happen is for it to happen organically. I think you're touching on something interesting as well. Like, if you look at a non-typical week in-house versus freelancing/agency, it's going to trainings and seminars, but also vacation. Not per se in it happening, because it happens for the both of us. But if there's a budget from your employer, you can do it while, I assume, you can do it during your 9 to 5. Like, it's not something you have to do in the evenings or the weekends. But for me, it's something I have to pay for myself. And then if that takes 2 or 3 days, that's 2 or 3 days where I make $0.
Sure.
So that's something I have to be careful of. On one end, I don't want to not do it, because then you will get behind, versus Figma wizards, cursor wizards, and whimsical experts like yourself. But then on the other end, if you do it too much, then your revenue drops as well. So that's a balancing act that requires a bit of thinking. So I have every week or every Sunday evening, I try to make a rough list of things I want to do during the upcoming week, and that includes making a list of, I should really talk to these people, or I should do this event or this thing on my own products. So I have a small portion of the week that's scheduling and planning and trying to be strategic for myself.
Yeah, I think what I like to do, I mean, I work in-house, so I have that allowance to kind of do things during, but whether it's a YouTube video or I'm a big fan of like an audiobook, to do it while I'm working. But I'm that person that likes a bit of chaos when I'm working, so I like loud noise and banging. If I'm reading something, I can still listen to a podcast at the same time. So I'm a bit of a chaotic person, but that's just the way I roll, I guess. But doing things in parallel always helps.
Yeah.
Well, especially if it's related to the work you're doing right now.
Do you have any planning during the week where you're like, okay, this part of the day, let's say, Wednesday morning, Friday afternoon, I'm going to do this thing and this thing only, or anything like no meeting blocks where you can do deep work, anything like that?
If I know I want to kind of finish something, I'll put like a little, I call it the cone of silence block on my calendar, so that I'm not distracted by meeting here or someone kind of messaging me. But I generally do it while I'm working. So like if I'm working and I know I don't have a meeting, I'll kind of put something on in parallel. I'll kind of listen to it.
Right. All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, I think it's very interesting to hear. Like, I think maybe as a bit of advice, like for anyone listening, regardless of the type of design role, I think it's always smart to talk to other designers about their way of working, because we talk all the time, and then we've known each other for a while, but just having an official talk about each other's work week moment like this, I'm already learning so much. Like, I should do like the whimsical thing, I should check it out. And now with the the silence block and the learning on the job, all the things. I'm like, oh, interesting. Like I'm going to try all these things out. So if you can get that kind of takeaway from any designer you talk to, I would recommend anyone to talk to like 1 or 2 designers a week or a month, perhaps if you're busy, because I'm learning something and I'm sure others will too.
Exactly. And also you can join some, like just some free mentorships out there, like ADP list,
Yeah.
which is a nice, I've tried a couple of times, just like speak to someone at your level or maybe a manager or someone, or just to learn. Just take out 45 minutes or an hour, whatever kind of block that they have available, just to get fresh perspective.
I think so too. Yeah, I'm speaking to someone later this Friday. And he's a freelancer too, and we're just going to talk design and have a nice chat, and I'm sure there will be like 1 or 2 nice takeaways as well, but perhaps that's inspiration for another episode. I don't know, it's not Friday yet, we'll see.
See how your week shapes up.
Yeah, exactly. So any closing thoughts, any best practices, golden nuggets, or any tips you want to share about a day in the week of a designer?
If we're talking about maybe something that I do that's been successful is during the discovery process. So generally, if you're working in-house, you're collaborating with engineering, product, and you're the designer, but you're generally, at least at the early stages, a bit more collaborating with the product managers. So they're either you're working on a problem together, or maybe they've created a document to kind of, they've identified an issue. Something that I do during my discovery work is creating like a design document. So almost like the design version of like a PRD or a product requirements document. And it's like the PM and designer, they're doing their discovery, understanding the problem space, and then you come back together with your own documents. And I find that you're aligned better if you have something to show. Number one, if you write what you've understood down, it's kind of clearer to you. And it's like, when you write it down, it's real and you've kind of understood it. But I found that I've incorporated that part of my process for the last couple years. Like your alignment is quicker and there's less debate, and you both come to the table with the same level of understanding. So it's less of like someone has all the context and you have a lot of questions. You're both coming and challenging challenging or collaborating what the best solution is to kind of solve that problem.
Right. Yeah. I think that's wonderful advice. You're taking a bit of notes and stakeholder management, so to say.
Yeah, so just a bit of point at 70% that I'm not in Figma. I'm documenting things in Confluence, just like getting my ideas down on paper or the digital paper.
Yeah, to have a bit of a fallback in case there's a discussion like, no, but we wrote down this thing last week. Oh yeah, that's true. That kind of stuff. It's a safety net also.
It is.
I think then that's also maybe a nice segue into our next topic, because writing down stuff and talking about it later, it's a bit about presenting work and its input for presenting work. Because I think, you came up with a topic for in 2 weeks for the next episode about presenting work, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one. I think it's an important part, like to go back to that 70% part, it's like presenting your work to your stakeholders or your collaborators. And the best way to kind of communicating, like certainly not getting into that at the table conversation, speaking the language of the community. So it's not about talking about design, it's about talking about the business problem you're solving. That way, I don't want to get into that conversation, but maybe we'll tease that for our next episode. But I think it's an important part of being a designer is to properly articulate like the value of the work you've done and how to properly collaborate.
And this applies both like on the job, but also I would say while job hunting.
Definitely.
Because you have to present yourself and previous jobs in case studies and perhaps whiteboard challenges and that kind of thing. So I think, how to present yourself can be like a universal designer's topic. that would apply to many different situations, many different designers in different places.
Yes, I think it's going to be it's going to be a very valuable talk that we're going to have in
for sure.
2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it already.
Well, it sounds like we've concluded this episode for this week. It was a great chat, I think.
I think so as well. As I said, learning a lot of things from you. And
likewise.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I'm going to try out the whimsical, and I'll let you know, perhaps even during an episode, if I have any thoughts or mind-blowing moments like, wow, this is so great. Let's use it all the time. But we'll see how it goes. I'll have to find a suitable moment for it first. Like when I see like, hey, this is a wireframing moment, let's try it out. But more on that later.
All right. Till next time.